And you're all very welcome here today to our panel discussion on Decarbonising Irish Cities. This is the first TU Dublin Graduate Network event since our farewell event to Kevin Street in March of 2020. Yeah, time flies. And the very first such event in our new wonderful building here, the Central Quad in Grange Gorman. So hopefully you'll get a chance to get a tour of the building later. Well, if you know the right people, you get a chance to get a tour of later. I saw, looking down through the guest list, we have representatives here today from more than 60 different companies, along with many of our TU Dublin alumni and graduates who've come back today. And we're delighted, I suppose, to welcome you and, of course, our panelists here to the Central Quad. And it does mean a lot to us to see our alumni come back to their alma mater. So you're all very welcome. Over the last few years, the world has changed fundamentally. How we live, how we work, how we interact with people. This has been accelerated by a pandemic, but it's a change that's been happening anyway. And we're just after supercharging the use of technology in how we live and how we work. So we've begun to use this technology in new, innovative ways. We've begun to develop, well, we have developed life-saving medications in record time. And I think one of the lessons that we can draw from the last few years is when we work together to a common goal, we can achieve so much. The issue of climate change, and in particular, the transition to a net zero carbon, is an existential issue. It's one that's going to require input from all of us in our professional and our personal lives. And we've learned in our recent past the value of working together, how pulling together and working towards a common goal can bring out the best in ourselves. TU Dublin has aligned our strategic plan with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We've created a new Vice President role which is focused on sustainability. That's Jennifer Boyer here, who's one of our panel members. Our university is developing a sustainability strategy and is considering aggressive carbon neutrality targets. Our strategic intent was developed through the lens of these UN SDGs. And 2 short years later, the impact of this is already apparent. TU Dublin has climbed into the top 200 in the Times Higher Educational Impact Rankings. We're ranked in the top 100 of universities around the world in 3 categories: SDG 11, which is Sustainable Cities and Communities, SDG 1, which is No Poverty, and SDG 13, which is Climate Action. And you could see today as a call to arms to address the challenges within the SDGs. So it's a call to arms for all of our TU Dublin staff, our students, and of course, our alumni. So please, sit back, enjoy the event. I would now like to hand you over to Laura Canalla, who will moderate the event and introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Curtin. So my name is Laura Canalla, and I'm the business editor with the Business Post. Thank you very much to TU Dublin for having invited me along here today to participate and moderate this discussion. Can I just say that the campus is an absolute credit, I think, to it. It's a fantastic urban space. As someone who lives nearby and actually is lucky enough to get to use the sports facilities there, I get to play on the GA pitch, so I'm very fond of this campus. So just to introduce the panel, we have Minister Eamon Ryan, I'm sure you all know, who's the Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications. Jennifer Boyer, who is the VP of Sustainability here at TU Dublin. Dr Fergus Sharkey at the end there, who's the Head of Business Supports and Transport at the SEAI. And Dr Ruth Kerrigan here beside me, who is the CEO of Integrated Environmental Solutions. So we're going to have a very broad-ranging discussion, I think, this evening on the Decarbonising Irish Cities topic, which, you know, that's 3 words, but it's there's a lot to unpack in that. So, Minister, we might start with you. It was recently announced that Dublin and Cork have been selected as 2 of the 112 European cities that are signed up that climate neutral pact by 2030. that's there's a lot to achieve there, to achieve that. There's a lot to be done. I suppose maybe give us a sense of what government is doing, the different state agencies, on the road to that 2030 carbon neutral for both cities.
Thanks, Lorcan. Let's forget about Cork for the moment. Just talk about Dublin. Let's talk about Dublin, our city, my city. And we were talking earlier on, it's about doing now in real life change, like with all the plans, with the National Development Plan, Climate Action Plan, Housing for All Strategy, and so it's delivery. It's all about delivery. I want 3 projects, or three deliverables, which we're going to have to deliver not in the next 10 years, but in the next 4 to 5. Firstly, Dublin needs a new grid. People will see there's advertising out in public consultation at the moment. EirGrid are planning a massive, really big investment in the electricity grid for the city. There's 2 or 3 reasons we need to do it. Firstly, we're going to bring offshore wind from the bay into the city. It'll land in Carrickmines or Poolbeg, or it could be Hunstown on the north side. That final grid decision is to be made in the next 6 months or so. And that's 2 gigawatts of power. It's a huge body of power. But when it gets ashore, we need an upgrade to the transmission grid in Dublin, effectively along the coast, but also spine out along the canals or east-west and out around the M50. And it's a huge development. It's a huge investment. We need it to manage the offshore renewable power, but we also need it to work all the heat pumps, all the electric vehicle chargers, all the industry, including data centres that we have in our city. We have a large number of them. And I'm confident EirGrid can do it. They're really capable. We are really skilled in this country at integrating renewable power. I believe both ESB and EirGrid, our distribution grid company and our transmission grid company, are world leading. And that's probably the most important key project for Dublin in terms, because that enables us to decarbonise our electricity and to provide the electricity we need for the switch away from the fuels. And it won't be easy. We dig up a lot of roads to put the cable in, but it's absolutely doable, fundable, and has to be delivered. Second project. Same time that we're digging up that road, probably along the canal, to put that electricity cable in, we will put in the district heating system coming out of the wastewater that's currently pumped into the Liffey from the incinerator and the other power generations in the Poolbeg Peninsula. Now, the electricity transmission cable is small. The district heating cable is big, huge. But there's investment has gone in already in advance. We have a tunnel, a cable underneath the underneath the Liffey to take that district heat from the south side onto the north side quays. And all the offices, all those new offices along the docks have been in their planning permission, have to be ready to take that district heating. And not just there, but we need to go down into Pearse Street, all the flats, social housing around that Pearse Street area, and we cover the whole area. This district heating is going to be a critical part of decarbonising heat, and it has to be kind of not picking the cherry, picking the rich pickings, but actually providing broad coverage. And in my mind, in this 4 to 5 year time horizon, we then go into Georgian Dublin and city centre Dublin. There's a huge volume of heat there. You could also go to Vincent's and, of course, the glass bottle site. But that district heating capability is critical, because for the likes of Georgian Dublin, we're not going to retrofit. We're not going to stick exterior cladding on number 10 Bagot Street. But district heating can and will work, and we've committed 20 million already to advance it, but that project is key. That project has to be, we have a series of government teams now set up to deliver some of these, to deliver offshore wind, to deliver heating, and thirdly, to deliver sustainable mobility. And the whole focus is on how quickly can we deliver those. And the third, I mentioned sustainable mobility, and I'm only picking 3 for Dublin, but my favourite, I cycled down here from the government buildings, and God almighty, the South Quays would break your heart. I mean, it was horrific. I mean, it's just horrific. I was in buses, trucks, cars, all in it wobbling, and I think in the next 3 years, in this time, when we're not going to see commuters coming back in, and I don't think in the numbers they used to be. So all that road space, all that city centre and commuting road space in, which for 50 years, the obsession was, I've worked with our transport engineers for years, and they're always saying, you got to keep them because we have to flush the traffic out in the evening. So we've got to keep all the road space to kind of flush traffic in and flush traffic out. That's not what we need to do now. What we need to do is do what we've been talking about for years and take the traffic out of College Green and actually create safe corridors. And it's not, I mean, I'm talking about the city centre here now, but you can supply the same to all sorts of different parts of the city, particularly for younger people, to allow them, when I was a kid, 20% were driven, 60% made their way by bike or walk. Now it's 60% are driven, 20% bike or walk. Flip that. And those 3 projects are committed to, are funded or will be funded, and won't be easy. It'll take a lot of, our planning system has always proved difficult in terms of getting big projects built fast. But I take just those 3 projects. I can give you another 3 more, but I'll come back to them.
Yeah, no, they're fascinating and ones that we can all relate to as people who use the city, and I suppose like the starting point of the road to carbon neutral or climate action is always those basic things of energy, heat, and how we use it. Kerrigan, if I could come to you, you have some experience in this area in terms of a different city. You might give us your take on kind of what the Minister has talked about there.
Yeah, I think I'll start with cities in general, but yeah, we do a lot of work with Limerick City. I think maybe picking up on the citizen side of it from the question, the EC are doing a review at the moment of the European Green Deal and what citizens will and won't do to adopt the Green Deal. And the massive feedback that's coming back, which I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear about, is that a lot of the time they just can't afford it. Even when there's incentives in place and when there's schemes in place and they're part funded, they're struggling at the moment to just pay increasing prices for electricity and gas, let alone actually go and do the deep renovation measures. But the other part that came out from citizens was that they want to see the public sector leading the way. And on the city side, there's the plan to roll out the decarbonisation zones across all cities across the country soon enough. And I think there's a massive opportunity there to bring in how the cities and the public bodies and the likes of the Pathfinder programmes with SEAI, how they can actually enable and educate citizens on what can be done, what impact it would have, because that was the other side. From the citizen side, there was a real lack of education of understanding energy. What can I do in my daily life? How can I avail of different schemes and all the rest? So I think when it comes to the cities, we can use them as a voice and work. What the work with Limerick are doing, for example, is they're taking very much a collaborative approach between the city and the citizen, getting the citizens' feedback as to what should be done across the city, and then using the cities to actually show the way. And I think within that, there's other opportunities that we absolutely need to push as well on sandboxing certain areas of cities, enabling innovation, because there is, like it or not, there's a lot of innovation blockers out there at the moment. There's companies out there who are trying to develop new technologies and trying to implement them, but you can get so far on an academic journey or an innovation journey of doing something, but eventually you have to go and implement it. And if we could sandbox some areas and cities where we can actually implement these new technologies under certain safeguards, of course, and actually start to accelerate that innovation coming through, I think we will start to actually, move this journey forward a little bit quicker than we are at the moment.
Okay, interesting. Particularly like your sandbox idea, I think that's a good one. Fergus Sharkey, if I could come to you next. The Minister recently announced earlier this year a major step change in our ambition around retrofit. I think, Minister, as a compliment to you, the day after that, I think my father rang me asking me, like, how do I sign up to where can I get one of these grants for retrofitting the house at home? And your agency is going to be the key touch point for householders in Ireland, right across Ireland, about retrofitting. What are you seeing so far, and what's your delivery pathway, I suppose, in that journey?
Yeah, so I mean, on the domestic retrofit, there's a major initiative now and a major investment by the government over the next 10 years in retrofitting and getting rid of fossil fuel heating systems is the objective, and decarbonising our homes. We've never seen the demand for our schemes that we have seen in the last number of months since that announcement. My comms manager would say it didn't crash our website, it just slowed it down. But when the day it was launched, we can see the impact. Our call centre was on its knees for weeks dealing with the amount of homeowners. So look, the government stepped up, the government have given a big scheme here, and what's really interesting is citizens are responding. So the key thing, and Minister said it right there, it's about results now, it's about delivery, and that's the entire focus of our organisation. It's streamlining our processes, getting the supply chain up and running, communicating our message as clearly as we can to homeowners, supporting them on their journeys. So the whole national retrofit program is, it is, in my mind, going to be a massive success story in Ireland's decarbonisation journey. We've done huge amount on electricity, and I think this is the next big shining star in terms of our own decarbonisation journey.
Okay. Jennifer, if maybe you give us a sense of your experience, maybe here within the university itself.
I've seen and worked with colleagues over a number of years who've developed programs to try and actually anticipate that retrofit need that we knew was coming down the tracks. And I think there's a huge need for actually upskilling across the board. And so the role of the university in upskilling the workforce to be able to deliver on this holistic, comprehensive national strategy is immense. And I think that with all of the time sensitivity around meeting these targets to ensure our future, we have to also consider what is possible. And so we have a finite number of people, we have a finite workforce at the moment that we need to fuel through education and bringing people through that process. But equally, we also need to look at alternative strategies at the same time. So as much as we can bring through the impact and the results through retrofit, there are definitely struggles and kind of barriers there that we need to look at, which means that actually that territory for looking at other solutions in parallel needs to be considered. So it's about citizen level engagement, but then it's also about pioneering and looking for what you can do within the boundaries of what you're in control of. So at the university, we've got colleagues who are pioneering geothermal boreholes in terms of creating more sustainable networks for ourselves as a university that can have an impact out on the community more widely. And we've got a whole portfolio of almost 50 different buildings of different ages to look at in terms of a retrofit strategy. So we've got a lot of work to do ourselves, and it's not going to be easy because of that age profile of the building and also the investment. There's a huge amount of investment, even if you have all the people and they have all the skills. The funding to fuel that, there's still quite a gap there.
Okay, yeah. But I suppose when you've that many buildings, it's a good testing ground for you in many ways as academics and researchers of what you're doing. Ruth, I come back to you maybe. The climate action plan has been signed into law. We've got carbon budgets which should be out. I suppose or carbon ceilings for each sector this year. We're already kind of a couple of years into the 2030 journey. And that road to a 51% cut. What's your sense of where we are? It's a big question I'm asking you now.
It's a great question. No, it's a great question, and I think when you look at those figures, 500,000 homes, 400,000 heat pumps, a lot of people will turn around and say this is too ambitious. We have all the upskilling to do. There's a lot of work to do, but we actually. So going back to Limerick again, I'm going to give Limerick so many digs today, but. Going back to Limerick, we actually created a digital twin of Limerick, so technology is a part to play here as well. I'll just add that in, but. We created a digital twin of Limerick where we can create a baseline model of the entire city and understand the demand across the city from both the buildings and the networks. And we actually took the National Climate Action Plan and we applied that across the city between now and 2050, along with a number of other measures the city is looking to do, like additional projects that they're looking to do, and being very optimistic that if every house has a smart meter, every building has a smart meter, they're going to save 10% energy magically, the magic wand. But we're very ambitious on kind of what we put into the roadmap, and by 2050 there was still a 60% gap. Now, I know that the decarbonisation of the grid is going to have a part to play in that, and that's assuming that we get there, but it also emphasises the need to get there because we can't do it on our own with just the buildings and the transport side. I think this also brings in this concept of the local energy system. So while the Minister is talking about a lot of the larger retrofit projects and the infrastructure projects, which are fantastic, we also have to look at the local energy system and what can we do locally. So Limerick again are looking at that positive energy block and how can you get buildings to produce and consume within their own block so that we're not having to rely on these larger infrastructure needs that will be coming later. So there's stuff at a local level that we can do now to kind of get this push moving forward. And with the National Climate Action Plan, the last kind of point I'll say from a gap perspective, I think it's fantastic to say be pushing towards this 500,000 homes to be B2. But if we do that and nobody turns down their thermostat, we're not actually going to save any energy. We're not actually going to reduce our energy consumption. So The National Climate Action Plan, I think, needs a bit more of an emphasis on measurement and verification, monitoring, enabling people to actually understand their energy use, look at operational and behavioural measures. We have an SEAI funded project about to start with the City of Limerick, where we're looking at putting in an IoT infrastructure network and then getting citizens themselves to actually install low cost, easy to use IoT sensors, and then giving them the information on how their buildings are operating, and getting them to take operational measures and behavioural measures. And the target is 10 to 15% reduction in every building. Now, if everybody in the country actually just through operation and behaviour reduced by 10 to 15%, we'd be a hell of a long way on our journey to actually, towards that decarbonisation targets. So I think, yeah, I think the National Climate Action Plan is good, and it starts it. I don't think it's ambitious enough, and I think there's more things that we actually can include to actually do things now, while we're waiting for those kind of larger infrastructure projects to come into play.
Okay, yeah. Behavioural change side of it is interesting, and trying to get people to do different things. If I could get my one wife to keep the heating off in the evening, I'd be doing well.
Well, maybe you need one of Fergus's grants to insulate.
Yeah, well, Fergus, I might follow up with you. Your maybe response to some of those things that Ruth has raised there in terms of, retrofitting is great, but behavioural changes also need, yeah?
Yeah, there's a huge behavioural element to this. We probably as engineers, we think about heat pump ready homes or something like that. We really need to think about heat pump ready homeowners and think about it in a different way. The human element here is a major factor, not only, trying to incentivize them and support them with the right model when they go on that retrofit journey, but also what we're seeing is that some of those energy savings from efficiency could be taken back in comfort effectively. A G-rated house may not be a G-rated house in reality, because what we find is somebody might just heat one room. So you get this ironic thing with, when they retrofit their home, suddenly you have a higher energy consumption because suddenly they have a comfortable home where they can use every room. So all of this needs to be factored in, but that's the beauty of electrification of heat, I guess, is that if we can electrify heat and if we can decarbonise our electricity system, then we effectively have zero emission heat. But the importance of energy efficiency then comes really in terms of running cost. If you have a zero carbon electricity system, really it's about, obviously deep retrofitting those homes from a thermal performance perspective to reduce energy bills. So all of that needs to be fleshed out, and there's a lot of interesting reflection on this within our national heat study, which really looks at, how can we marry this need for speed with the need for making sure that homeowners get the right solutions that they can understand, and that they can actually get reductions in energy costs while getting increases of comfort. It's a balancing act, but significant challenge.
Well, it's at times like these as well, though, I suppose, of high energy prices that consumers are, I suppose, it pushes them down the road of thinking about retrofitting more. It makes it more attractive when they see those big bills coming in for gas or whatever. I suppose come to you, Jennifer, a question on the role of universities in decarbonisation. And what you're bringing to the table in terms of new research or different elements of the role of decarbonisation?
Well, I think universities are that testing ground. They are that sandbox, if you like, and we have both a set of kind of physical assets and infrastructure across our campuses that we need to develop and think about and master plan for decarbonisation. So that means creating, a smart campus across all of our locations. That means actually the measurement piece in terms of capturing those behaviours in a dynamic way that feeds back and actually implements and impacts people's decision making when they're on campus. We also have a role to play now post-COVID, and I think James put it very well, that we've learned a lot by working together. We've really exercised our digital selves in the last while to figure out, well, what is higher education through digitization, and where is that balance and need to come together, and how can things be more flexibly, inclusively incorporated online? So there's a lot there to optimize ourselves and kind of rethink how we perform as higher education institutions, and I think technological universities have a very important role to play in a human-centered approach to technology and closing that theory and practice gap where you say, actually, okay, we've just been through the last 2 years of moving online and some of the things really didn't work and some of them worked really well. So how do we bring that theory and practice back together now in a new model? How do we rethink our campuses and optimize the assets that we have? How do we work with our community stakeholders to develop and pilot things like district heating like we have in Tala, and also the geothermal technology that we're exploring here in Grangegorman? And how can we bring that about in a transparent way that includes our students and all of the stakeholders in that conversation to foster debate? And you know, it is going to be tricky if you have to dig up the roads along the canal, no doubt about it, but we have to figure out where we stand as citizens ethically between what we need to determine to give up in order for us to have a secure future. So I think that's the role of a university, and particularly a technological one.
Minister, can I follow up on that question? I suppose from your perspective, I'm sure you're seeing and hearing a lot of interesting research that's coming all the time, and I'm sure you're always interested to hear what's coming up, what's coming through the pipeline in terms of potential decarbonisation technology. What are you seeing out there in the research side of things that excite you, I suppose?
I think it excites me. I'm back to Dublin now. There's some research in UCD on trees, canopy in our city, coverage, trees in our city. And it's very interesting. The leafy suburbs are the wealthy suburbs. I can't remember the full statistic, but the poor areas typically 1 tree for 10 people. The rich areas, 10 trees for 1 person. And I do think part of the decarbonisation and part of the sense of place, urban place, the creation of what they call the sponge city, a city that can absorb the rainfall, that can provide shade, shelter, block sound, creates cleaner air, really healthy environment. And I do think all that big technology stuff, but actually sense of place and how we create Dublin as a beautiful city. And Dublin isn't really a city. It's Dublin is it's Dublin town in the centre. Like it's town you go into, or when I was a kid, and the suburbs in Dublin have, I'm as south side suburban as you can get. And like, we criticise, people give out about it a lot, but there's a lot that's great in south side suburb. Like it's great to have gardens. It's great to have that green space in a large parts of our city, this kind of incredible. And I really think the thinking about that sense of greening in literally in the physical sense of how do we create Dublin town, the centre. I mean, we're talking about going from Rathmines maybe to here, Grangegorman as the town bit. And how do we create that as a beautiful green environment with canopy, using space for greening of it. And then I think when it comes to the suburbs, like I grew up in, it was Dundrum Village. Now, it's not a village anymore, Blanchardstown Village or Tala Village. It's like Tala's not a village. But that sense of creating centres around the city so that there is a sense of a centre, there's a sense of place, there's a sense of a beautiful place. And I think, like what's done, I know it's a cliche, everyone's talking about it, but Blackrock Village, what's happened there as a changing the sense of place. And it's Blackrock Village, but it's a big hinterland. And so I think some of the research that's been done, just pick it as one of the random ones, but what's been done on the mapping of the tree cover and the potential to change that is one of the most interesting things I've seen the last few years, because I think it's very real and it's not huge cost, it's not huge difficult technology, but it could be transformative. And what I would love to see is big trees. Like Palmerston Road doesn't have little ones. None of those thwarted, stunted, genetically modified, tiny little things. Massive ones, everywhere. And why not?
Yeah. Well, recently I've noticed, I think Dublin City Council have done some fantastic work around the Customs House, and it's kind of greened up that area where it's a commuter kind of a traffic belt, but they've done really nice work on it, and it makes the city, a very urban part of the city, quite pleasant to pass through, I find, and people would welcome that. I think the greening of our cities. There's a question here that's an interesting one, kind of in keeping what you were talking about there, with our town and then the little village satellites around it. So a question came in, does that sprawl that we have is a feature of Dublin City? We're not a high-rise city like others. Does that undermine efforts to decarbonise when we don't have a more centralised housing blocks and things like that we can, you can get greater bang for your buck essentially when they're more centralised?
answer that?
If you want, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. Firstly, the Sprawl of Dublin. I was speaking at another event last week, and it reminded me of John Henry, a brilliant traffic engineer, who said it was the unintended consequence of good intentions. Like, we cleared the slums in the centre and we wanted people out because we had TB, we had cholera and typhoid in the late 19th century and early 20th century in Dublin. So it was a very good instinct to get out to Marino or Kimmage or Crumlin and have this cleaner air, and we really loved it. And then we kept going. So we went out to Finglas, Blanchester and Tala, but we didn't stop. Before you knew it, we were in Ratoath, Gorey, Dunboyne, and it's kind of ever outwards. We do need to come back in, and that is a critical kind of point to change. I don't believe we need to go high-rise in doing that. I see what's happened. I was down in near the, what's that hotel, the Gibson, down near the Point the other day at a conference. And I was just thinking, I was walking around, and actually, we were very critical at the time that the Docklands, we didn't go high, and it was only 6 or 7 stories. But actually, I think it's starting to be a place that actually is a nice place to live, because that 6, 7 stories is the kind of Parisian, European, continental type. It does work. What my colleague Kieran Coffin, architect, says is if you go up to 14 or 15, you get a disconnect to the street. You don't get that sense of community. So I think in the town bit and in the village bits, we should have high density. It doesn't need to be high rise. And I think I'm glad that Dublin City Council and of others have tried to protect that sense of the possibility of Dublin being a flat city with very dense 7, 8 stories, 6, 7, 8 stories, whatever it is, up to 10, whatever, but not 20 or 30. I think if we did that, it would change the feeling and sense of this town. And I'd prefer to do it that way.
Okay. Ruth, you might comment on that from your perspective. You talked earlier about that sandbox idea as well. What's your thoughts?
I probably maybe disagree a little bit with the Minister on bringing back into the city, and I think now with remote working, it's been a massive change that we actually now can work from anywhere. This has become the new thing now, work from anywhere. And I think there's a lot of advantage to, I live in a town, in a suburb, and I love it. And I come to the city maybe once a week, and there's public transport routes that help me get there. So I'm not sure about driving everybody back into the city centre. I think in certain cities where you might have, say, again, use Limerick as another example, where you might have some derelict zones and you want to create that sense of place that you're talking about.
3% of the population of Limerick live in the historic core of the city. 3%.
And there's a lot at the city centre that as a result is kind of like derelict and run down and not nice, and that's what they are trying to do. They want to drive people back in for that purpose. So I think there's a balance that we drive people back in to create a good sense of community, a good sense of place, and a nice city to be in. But there should also be opportunities not to live in cities as well.
Fergus, I might come to you with a question on the retrofitting rollout. I mean, it's a step change in our ambition now. The big challenge, I suppose, is availability of labour to carry out a lot of this. Maybe, what's your thoughts on that? Can we get the tradespeople? Can we get the skills? And then maybe as a follow-up, Jennifer, we'll come to you about universities supplying that workforce.
Yeah, so it's probably the biggest challenge. We have the people within the government and within state agencies now. We have a significant budget. We have strategy and all the offerings. So this is going to be one of the key challenges, is getting the plumbers and electricians and attracting them to this industry. So, there's a couple of different angles to it. The one is, we need to create retrofit as, if you wish, a recession-proof industry. So the baseline really for the construction industry, that they can continue to go decade by decade, because this is going to take decades to get through all of this. So that's, and that's where giving certainty to the supply chain is really important. And I think that's been done in recent years, where we scaled up from annual budgets now to a real big commitment and a real big statement of what's going to be invested in this over the next number of years. I do think we have a challenge in Ireland around apprenticeships, and I think making that more attractive. I'll let the Minister talk about it, because it's been a key part of Simon Harris's ministry, really, to look at this and to look at the skills piece around retrofit. And I think we've all seen it on the news in recent weeks. The new centres of excellence that have opened within the ETB structures and so on is very welcome. But we have, and it's a piece that I would say that TUD really are core to, is the apprenticeship journey and the role that a significant volume of electrical apprentices have come through, well, not these doors, probably Kevin Street's doors, but starting to come through these doors. So yeah, it's a challenge. So we have to make it an attractive industry. We're doing that from the top down by creating demand from homeowners and creating the right structures and supply chains that an enduring and sort of significant sustainable sector is developed. And then obviously we need the universities and we need the demand from young people to come home and young people to apply themselves to that as a career. So it has to be a very attractive career.
Yeah. You'd imagine though with the money that's there now and the commitment in the National Development Plan that, you know, that's a big market signal for people thinking about getting into retrofitting as a business opportunity. Jennifer, you might talk about the, you know, the pipeline of talent coming out of universities and what you see there.
Well, I think, you know, picking up, actually, we are in a very unique position at TU Dublin because we have a legacy of apprenticeship, and I think, you know, we have a huge loyalty around the apprenticeship programs that we've developed over a long period of time as well. We graduate almost 8,000 graduates every year out into industry, and a large portion of them are in the engineering and built environment faculty. And so actually we have a large number of people in the pipeline. We equally have innovative educators and researchers developing programs all the time, and I'm looking at colleagues here who are doing that. And actually, we haven't been able to, for many years, bring people into that space because the learning curve is so steep. So we've figured out how to actually bring about learning that is possible. It's meeting learners where they are in their workplaces, in their lives, to be able to actually deliver on all of that. But then equally, you know, the recession-proof piece is essential because we are funded on a per-student basis every year. And this idea of multi-annual planning is essential to be able to know where to invest and direct our resources to keep that pipeline going. The comment about the Minister's desire for universities and ETBs to become much closer as a pipeline is also critical. So actually establishing that larger ecosystem of knowledge to bring learners through at every level. And equally, we're learners in this process. So we have expertise, but it's about sharing that expertise across ourselves to deliver on that capacity that we need to the new learners out there to reach the market. So we've got a lot of work to do. We have all the makings to do it, but I think the recession-proof piece, the planning piece, and a whole new variety of collaborations are needed to do that. So that's the ETBs, that's ourselves working really closely with industry. And it breaks down all of these previously kind of competitive barriers because we have a shared focus around something that is imminent and existential. So.
Well, I suppose we're 10 years ago with the construction industry. These are good problems to have, really, for the country in many ways. And conscious we've a good group of people here that are, I'd say, maybe interested and eager to, if there's any questions, maybe for any of our panelists, maybe please put your hands up, and I will get you there if there's anybody. But maybe, Minister, you might talk while people are maybe formulating a few questions about what we were talking about there about the skills and you know, helping, you know, getting people into these key, I suppose the decarbonisation economy maybe is what it is essentially.
Yeah, I think that is the key obstacle or one of the big constraints at the moment across so many different areas. I think it'll take time. I think part of the reward, and I was in Sue's talk yesterday, Boardnamone at the moment. Boardnamone have gone from brown to green. Boardnamone is getting the pick of the best at the moment because younger people want to go in to be part of they want to be part of this transition. And those companies that aren't part of that will find it harder to get young people. I think that's one of the changes that's occurring, it seems to me.
Yeah. Well, as someone from Offaly, I'm very much would agree with that. And I've a lot. I was down in Cloncreen Wind Farm last week, and it's fantastic to see. Like, if nothing embodies the transition that we're going through, then the peat farms, fields where they used to harvest the peat for the power plant in Edenderry, and now there's these wind turbines, and that will be our future wind energy. So, any questions? Yes.
There's a program going on at the moment. It's been going on now for nearly 3 years. The Connex program. And fantastic idea, but disastrously put together. And one of the issues is that there is no plan to reduce car numbers in that policy or that programme. Absolutely nothing. To increase the bus service, the plan on the Navan Road, in particular from Blankets down to the city centre, is to take out trees. Exactly the opposite of what the Minister was talking about a few minutes ago. They will take front gardens. So a quality of life of a neighbourhood, which is a corridor going into the city, which is too narrow in the first place, was badly designed obviously 70, 80 years ago, and nobody was to realise what life was going to change like then. So the question is, we're talking about decarbonisation, yet we're still going to allow the same number of cars to come in and still compete with the buses, and then reduce the quality of life of the people who live in this area.
Yeah, so it's about finding.
That is mirrored all over. I've looked at the 16 or 17 bus corridors, and most people who have been involved in them, because I've been in touch with some of them, when you drag something out for years, and the bus Connex thing's been dragged out for years, people lose interest. And then, as now they're being advertised to go through more Planala. So we're going to miss something here. We're going to miss something important. And I know the Minister is very keen on the green environment and all the rest of it, and I have to compliment him on all of the work that has been done. But in this case, this is one of those things that there's a contradiction between what has been done and the decarbonisation issue.
Okay. Minister, you might respond maybe?
I would agree with you with the first draft version of the Bus Connex, but I was very involved, went to I don't know how many public consultation meetings, and you're right, it's been dragged out, it's taken so long. But one of the benefits of that public consultation process is the plans changed, and I would agree with you. I think it can't be about just keeping the existing number of cars on the road. It won't work. It won't work geometrically, mathematically. It won't work in emissions. It won't work economically. It's so expensive for everyone to have a car, and be running cars in and out. But I think if you look at the Bus Connex projects, it has actually changed. They did listen. They did actually amend and did a lot more bus gates and a lot more taking actual road space. And I think that fundamental question in the consultation process, is it corridors or communities? It is communities. Those villages I talked about they can't be just corridors. It's all about getting in and out of the centre. And I think the project is the right one. I think it needs to be delivered quickly now, once through planning, but particularly the low-cost elements, the bus gates elements, where you are restricting traffic, is what we need to do. Often we can do it ahead of and instead of taking out gardens or taking out trees. And I think I support the Bus Connex project. We need to build it now, and I think it has changed, and it is better for it, for the consultation.
Any other questions here in the yellow, and then we'll go up to the back there as well.
I like to think saffron.
Saffron, sorry.
I'm Joseph Biddle. I'm Program Chair of the Building Performance Masters here in TU Dublin, educating building design professionals for exactly what we're talking about here, the decarbonising through better and lower risk designs, of buildings. I have an interesting situation at the moment in that I'm actually deep renovating an inner city cottage myself. I said you text about it there Eamon, a while ago, and it's interesting. It's one of the lovely communities that we have. Window, lovely people have their seats outside, and then the planters and all the rest of it, and people living in the city in very modest circumstances, modest sizes, but they're connected to a great community and so close to the city and so on. But it's interesting that the cost of having to do that properly in a way that's hopefully best practice and is moisture managing, is solid wall construction. So you're looking at wood fibre or internal wall insulation systems. We're putting in monitoring. Ruth will be here, glad to hear. We're looking at circularity. We've 8 or 9 different post-construction, post-consumer waste materials and biomaterials, including Irish timber for Irish timber frame, believe it or not. That's unusual in this country at the moment. So there's a lot of things that we're doing, and myself and my wife are entirely self-funding this. We wouldn't be able to get any funding, as far as I know, from SEAI other than putting in a heat pump, because we're using materials that are not fossil-based materials, and they're not made by multinationals, but they are proper materials made by properly researched products in the market, and they're a whole range of things. And it just strikes me that it's very difficult to do the right job. And at the moment, I think the major retrofit project is fantastic. It's incredibly necessary. The engagement on a number of departments in Coilshin and the Department of Deeper and what you're doing there in SEAI is fantastic. But there's quite a bit of joint thinking yet to be done. I mean, for instance, at the moment NSAI, I'm sorry to say that, but they're greatly restricting the availability of grant aid for appropriate materials for historic buildings. They're actually restricting that access. In terms of one-stop shops, there isn't yet, and I know it's a new initiative and it's a fantastic initiative, but we need a whole quadrant of one-stop shop contractors that are focused on historic buildings. They're at least historic building friendly, historic building focused, and I think that's a different grouping. It might be a quarter of the whole, but I think that's a grouping that's badly needed. As I look out of my house at the moment, I'm looking at a house across the road where the streetscape is being destroyed by a poorly thought deep renovation, where someone has good intentions, but the streetscape is diminished as a result. We shouldn't have that. We need to be able to recognise our streetscapes and the communities that we live in at the end of this great venture, and there are very good ways to do that. SR 54, it doesn't yet relate to historic buildings. I know there's some measures to upgrade it, but it's also problematic even as it is. So we've got the great ambition, we've got fantastic policy, we've now got funding for the first time of a significant measure to address these sorts of deep renovation issues, but we've got a lot of gaps, and we really need to look at those issues of patrimony, of heritage, of moisture management, of health, indoor air quality, and tying it together and supporting the people who are really trying to
particularly because it's an older city as well, many of in Ireland. Fergus, you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think they're really, I obviously Joseph is very experienced in this area, which we're well aware of. I think they're very valid points, and there's maybe three areas I would take out of it. The first, you didn't quite touch on it, but you did mention it, which is embodied carbon, right? So the embodied carbon of a retrofit. And I do think that's a nettle that SEAI are now grasping, and need to look at it in a very deep way when it comes to both the building regs for new builds, but which is going to come, mandated by Europe, etc. But also within our retrofit plans, without a doubt. The second piece is about historic buildings, and I'm not going to dispute what you're saying. I think there's a particular challenge there, both technically, that we haven't, as you say, there's gaps. But also, one of the ones I probably wouldn't have appreciated would have been the aesthetically one. The streetscape and the impact on the public environs and the built environment. The third piece is probably about the certification of materials, which is connected to the embodied carbon piece. So let's just call them alternative materials, but very valid materials to be used. I think that's where we will work with the certification bodies. We will look at the barriers to the deployment of those within our schemes, without a doubt. But I do agree with you. I think there's an enormous risk within our heritage buildings that, one, they're done wrong. And the second is they're done in a way which, technically wrong, and as we know, there's enormous risk, with solid buildings and so on. And the other is that they're done in a way that isn't, let's say, consistent with the streetscape. So
and then you have to try and balance that with trying to leave it cost efficient enough that people will invest in doing these things. Ruth?
Yeah, can I just add to that? I think there's going back to the National Climate Action Plan, and Fergus, you yourself alluded to it earlier about the fact that if you go the one-stop shop programme, in order to qualify for the one-stop shop programme, you have to bring your building to a B2, and you could have a G-rated building that brings to a B2 and consumes more energy than it actually did before. And the National Climate Action Plan focuses on this envelope rating. And you look at the historic buildings, you look at other buildings, there's plenty of buildings that if we forgot about the envelope rating and said, I want to reduce them by 40%, and if you reduce by 40%, then I'll give you the grant. I think there's just too much of an emphasis on this B2 asset rating and not enough emphasis on our operation and what we're doing from the energy efficiency side, and that would solve the historic and the heritage building problem if we actually brought that in as and Neighbours is coming. Hopefully it'll come here. It's come to the UK. Hopefully it'll come here. That might give us another type of rating system that we can qualify against and give grants against. That isn't just the asset side. So I think it's something we need to consider.
We'll at the back, and we'll go here next after that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Niall Roach is my name. I'm actually an environmental health graduate up here, so many years ago back in Grove Street. My question is about health and how well are we integrating the issue of public health when we're talking about decarbonising our cities and addressing the issue of climate change. You mentioned there, Minister, about trees and how it's good for the environment, but trees are essentially also very good for health because obviously they provide shade, they absorb carbon, and they help to reduce the urban heat island effect in our cities. How well are we incorporating health into our education, including education within schools of architecture, schools of engineering or social policy? I personally teach also on environmental health and climate change and health in the Centre for Global Health in Trinity College. I teach in UCD on the Masters in Public Health. I teach in UL on the Masters in Public Health there. NUI Galway on Masters in Climate Change, Agriculture, Food Security, and also in the College of Surgeons, where we're trying to include climate change and health into the medical curriculum. So, in my opinion, COVID was addressed principally as a public health challenge and a public health emergency. We have declared climate change as an emergency. How well are we incorporating health into that challenge? Because for me, I'm interested in SDG 3, I'm interested in issues around active travel, and I'm also particularly interested in the issue of air quality. And you mentioned, Fergus, I think it was, about behaviour change. I'm also really, really interested in the issue of behaviour change, because I think the health argument, in my opinion, is not being well made, certainly not in the national media that I'm hearing. And there are massive co-benefits for health of populations, but also the co-benefit for the health system, because the health system won't need to be spending as much money on dealing with chronic illness over a long period of time. So
Yeah.
I could go on and on. Generally speaking, how is health involved?
Minister, you might talk about that in terms of, like, I mean, the decarbonising fossil fuels out of our cities is you would imagine will have an immediate impact. And Jennifer, you might also talk about that as well from an architecture perspective. So, Minister, maybe you might kick off.
This gentleman's right in one thing. We were chatting earlier about bus connects, and I was looking at some figures recently, modelling for some of the big transport projects in our city, and they were looking forward 20, 30 years. And I was so depressed because the best the modelling could do is show we'd go from 2.4% of journeys by bike to 2.7 or something like that. And I was thinking, no, you don't understand. It's going to be bigger change than that. And one of the main reasons is because the health benefits of getting us active is beyond compare. The health benefits in the pulmonary system, but also Dr. Yolanda Burke, I think, is at the Royal College of Surgeons doing work recently on the mental health benefits, beyond compare. And so I agree with you. I think particularly active walking and cycling, you cannot beat it for proved health outcomes. You add, is it 7 years if you're a regular active cyclist, you live 7 years longer. I mean, if anyone on their deathbed was thinking, if only I'm bloody well, I'd have another 7 years.
Yeah.
So I agree with you, and I think so, and I think it is underplayed, and I think health should be at the, particularly in that, I believe in that transport area, the health benefits is beyond compare.
Yeah, I personally cannot wait until the city has no more fossil fuel buses and cars in it. And when you're walking down the street or cycling, you're not breathing in fumes from buses and trucks and things like that. That's going to be a fantastic game changer. Jennifer, this campus is a fantastic example of a brilliant, architecture, green space in an urban area, and you see people out here all the time in the evenings walking and using the amenity that it is, as well as an educational place.
No, I mean, the campus, has opened during COVID, essentially. There hasn't been an official opening yet, but it was a public park. It was a place people came and passed through and brought their families to get away from the screen and go and have the walk and feel healthy and be connected together as a community. As an architect, and having taught within the programs in architecture for a number of years, we still aren't measuring wellness in the way that we should as part of that design process and part of the technical realization of buildings. And if you think about the way in which buildings are certified, you know, well buildings are at the top of the list in terms of their level of achieving a holistic compliance, let's say, with what energy has gone into making them, what materials have gone into making them, and considering the user. So we have come some way in the architectural discipline, but we have a long way to go in terms of post-occupancy evaluation and feeding that back into new design processes. So it's about that kind of overall life cycle analysis process and whole cost thinking about costs to do with finance, but also costs to do with human health and the occupiers. I think, you know, one of the things that we are really engaged with now is through action research projects, and Lorraine Darcy is here as our conference chair for the Walk 21 conference that we're hosting in September, which is a conference about walking. It's essentially demonstrating that multiplier effect between the benefits of sustainable transport, health, and sport and enjoyment. And so through an activity, something as simple as walking, which I think we've all experienced during COVID in needing to get out or bringing the kids out so that they don't go crazy in the house, out on a walk and the enjoyment and the health benefits mentally and physically of that. This conference is there to bring together multidisciplinary conversations around the possibilities of raising those levels of health within society through very economic, simple, and attainable and accessible measures. So health is a huge agenda, and I think, you know, we've done a lot of work over the last number of years. We have a task force at Healthy TU Dublin of over 70 committed volunteers from across the staff who are looking to put together wellness modules and doing social engagement activities with each other to promote that understanding that health is a physical as well as a mental state. So it's essential.
I'm conscious of time, we're slightly over, but it's been a really engaging conversation, and there's a lot going on. We might take one more question from this lady here.
I'm Colette Burns. I work as the architect on the campus here in TU Dublin, and I see a lot of my colleagues here as well. It's not so much as a question as a sort of general opening that every one of the panellists spoke about broad-reaching strategies that all require skilled people to implement them. We have a massive problem. As I said, I'm an architect. Between 2008 and 2010, 85% of the construction industry left Ireland because of the enormous recession. And we're actually still suffering the consequences of that now. And similarly, one of the reasons we cannot retain talented people is because there's nowhere for them to live in our various cities. So all of these strategies are, you know, they're extraordinary, and there are a lot of very smart people working on them, but they can't work unless there's the people there to do it. So that discussion around continuity of funding, continuity of strategies, the broad reach approach is the only way that we will reach anything that stands together holistically. How can we guarantee that?
Yeah. Does anybody maybe, I mean, the question I suppose is interesting. A lot of people did leave the country. The economy in Ireland is doing very well at the minute. There's great opportunities here for any discipline. How do we get people back to Ireland? I've seen like the construction industry advertising at Dublin Airport at Christmas. Minister, you might talk about it.
There's a programme being run from St Andrews Resource Centre in Pearse Street. It's run with SkillNets, I think, and it's run down in Dublin Port, and it's a 3-week training course for people for the really basic skills in insulation, drilling holes into a cavity wall. They build a cavity wall and then they drill holes into it. And talk about bringing people back. They're people who've been 3, 4, 5 years maybe unemployed. And it's incredibly successful. About 66% end up coming out of it into employment. Very hard to go from long-term unemployment into work, but they're doing it. There about 450 people have gone through now, 2 women and 440 men, but it's a really nice project and a good example, because actually you get working again, and you do that for 6 months, a year or two, and before you know it, you're not just doing the roof insulation or the cavity wall, but we'll teach you how to do the next bit. And I think that's an example of, it doesn't always have to be big or long, or sometimes that project inspired me anyway as to how we. And then lastly, I would say, I think your point about housing is critical and clear. That is, and going back to bringing people back into the centre, one of the things in social justice is that you don't want such a long distance between where your work is and where you're living. So we do need to take land from the port. We do need to take Cattleborough Barracks, in my mind. We do need to look at Grange, at Broadstone here. Broadstone bus depot. Maybe build over it, because those buses won't be polluting fuels. They'll be electric buses in 5 years' time. And so therefore, could we build over that land, still keep the bus depot coming in and out? And that is critical. And that, I believe the housing forward strategy that the government has is the right strategy. And the national planning framework, which backs it up, which is about better balanced regional development, it has to be, I take back what I said about Cork earlier and about Limerick, it has to be, Dublin is getting too much. We won't be able to manage in Dublin if all the development is in Dublin. So we need Limerick. Limerick needs to be twice the size. The Buchanan report set that sort of target 40, 50 years ago, and we failed completely to deliver on it. So, but in Dublin, we would also need those large areas of public land close to the centre, Inchicore trains, Inchicore, 70 acres, I think, isn't it? So that's huge. We're going to put a new depot out near Kilcock. That land needs to be a new village, close to this, actually could be part of town even, because that housing issue, you're absolutely right. It has to be sustainable in every way.
I would just follow up because I think actually government's doing some interesting things right now in terms of a whole government approach. And that type of whole government approach, if the departments and the parties change over time, at least there's a systems thinking approach that has the UN SDGs in mind in terms of delivering on what the national priorities are. So even if some of the people change and some of the politics change, the common purpose for what we are about can still live through a whole government approach over time. And I think that level of continuity perhaps is something that could afford better planning, better funding, more recession-proof thinking in terms of drawing back people into a less volatile environment, perhaps. So I think there's good examples of that are coming to fruition recently, but I think we need a lot more of it too.
Okay, I'm going to finish by asking each of our panelists one question. And we'll start with you, Fergus. Our 2030, decarbonise our cities by 2030. Can it be? Are you confident we can do it? And one thing that you think needs to change if we're to get there, and I'll ask each panelist the same question.
Am I decarbonise our city by 2030?
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be overly confident with that. Can we make a significant dent in it? Yes, I firmly believe we do. We can. We have to be on a accelerate. There has to be a significant step change in terms of the next number of years. So we have to be, the momentum by 2030 should be unstoppable. And you talked about whatever political parties, whatever government is in place, it should be unstoppable. The one thing I change, I think, like what has changed, sorry, I'm going to take it, but what has changed in my nearly 20 years since I've been involved in the sector is we're not arguing about climate change anymore. And to an extent, we're not really arguing about the solutions as much as we used to. But what has to change now is just a complete shift and singular focus of our society on what is an existential crisis, an existential challenge of our time. That is happening, but it hasn't happened to the scale it needs to get.
Yeah, Jennifer, yours.
So do I think we can meet 2030? I think I would agree it's really ambitious. We're discussing a 2040 decarbonisation target for ourselves within the boundaries of TU Dublin, within the bounds of our control. So that's our campuses, our buildings, the energy consumption, how many people within the community we draw to campus and have come to work on campus. But I think in order to do something like that, there is such a level of systems thinking needed that all of those competitive barriers need to disintegrate quite quickly. So one thing I'm seeing more and more of is sharing. Sharing of information, sharing of best practice, sharing of knowledge, whereas previously that would have been siloed or competitive. And I think, the universities as a whole within the country are starting to share practices a lot more amongst themselves because we recognize we have unique cultures, we have unique offerings, but actually there's a bigger question out there that we need to solve, and we can only do it together. So I think more together is the thing I would change.
Okay, Ruth, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I don't think it's a question of can we, I think it's a question of that we have to. If we don't decarbonise by 2030, our children won't have a planet to live in. That's the bottom line. we are in a slow motion pandemic, and we saw with the COVID-19 pandemic that when it hit, we were able to find the money to deal with it. I think we need radical changes. I think we need a hell of a lot more money being pumped into this. No more half measures, no more here's a 50% retrofit. Why, like Spain give 110% incentives for retrofit schemes to actually encourage people to do it. I think we need to actually start to really think much bigger than we're thinking right now. I think we need to look at both top down and bottom up. So from the bottom up side, we need to get the citizens more engaged. We need to educate the citizens. They need to know what they're doing. From the top down, we need to look at the policies from the government, remove a lot of the blockers that are there with various semi-state bodies that might be not enabling innovation coming out. And I think we actually need to take this by the horns and do something with it. I think we're tiptoeing around it. So that's my view.
I like your blunt approach. Minister, I'll give you the last word. And I get the sense from you that we can do this.
To take the Bill Gates quote, people often overestimate what you can do in a year and underestimate what you can do in a decade. And I think that's true. As to what would change, what needs to change, the story needs to change. The story, a political story, the wider one as I see it, from the Second World War to the late 70s, it was the social democratic story, good story. Government provides education, health, housing, meets all your needs. Late 70s, early 80s, that changed. People lost faith in it for whatever variety of different complex reasons. And then it was the market story for almost 35, 40 years until the financial crash. And then that market story, and also the ecological destruction and social disadvantage within it, it wasn't a credible story. In the 10 years since the crash, there's been we've kind of foostering around with different stories. There's a populist story, it's all the elite, it's all globalization, it's all whatever. But that's not a true story. I think there needs to be an ecological story, a system change, as you say, which is based on the Sustainable Development Goals are a good framework, but it's a story of it has to have that social justice in it as well as economic, as ecological reparation, and it has to be a story that's held consistently for 3 decades politically, so that no matter what the election is, a government is going to follow that story. In the same way that in the 50s and 60s, Roosevelt was New Deal, but Eisenhower wasn't any different, and Nixon wasn't that much different. But and the same way in that 30, 40-year story, the market knows best. Even the Labour Party in the UK, they were the most market-oriented people I ever met. That consistency of the story leading to consistency of direction for 2 or 3 decades is what we need. And the story has to be one that inspires. It's not a technocratic, not even an economic one. It's a story that, as you say, Ruth, is to actually inspire towards a future for our children.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think we'll draw the session to a close. And you might put your hands together for our panel.